Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On this episode, going to be finishing up the major sheet metal work on the C10 bed, getting the tailgate on and aligned, and getting it ready to start doing some of the major body work on it. And also going to be getting the fenders prepped and ready for paint, to get those painted hopefully in the next week or so, and start getting to work on some of the other body panels and getting them painted and start getting the truck assembled. It's been a long process, and I kind of like to start getting that done and seeing some more progress on the truck. Okay, to get you guys up to date on what I've done is I've got all the rough welding and grinding done on the roll pan. I still have some cleanup to do on this side, but the spot welds have all been cleaned up across the top. And this side right here is pretty much good to go as far as getting it ready for body work. At this point, I'm going to get the tailgate back on and get it fitted and finish up over on this corner of the bed where it was kind of tweaked from shipment anyway. So this side needed a little bit more work than the other side, and go over these new hinges that I got, or I guess you want to call them trunnions. I don't know. But the old ones are metal, solid, they're just zinc plated, and you have metal on metal contact between this and your tailgate. There's no actual true like pivot point hinge other than metal on metal. So once you got them painted, you can imagine what's gonna happen over time with that. The new ones that I've got, this updated design that I found, is a little bit different as far as the backing is actually stainless steel, so you can put them on how they are, or you could polish these up to make them look like chrome. And then you actually have a removable bolted on, wouldn't really call this a bearing because it doesn't really pivot, but you do have a bushing that's replaceable, and it is a type of bushing that you're not gonna have metal on metal contacts. So this, I think, for what type of truck it is, will work out a lot better than the original factory hinges. Now, this side needed a little bit of work. When they manufactured this bedside, these did not go exactly where they're supposed to be, and I don't really want to go through the effort of changing it. So all I've done on the old one was open these up a little bit. Gonna have to do the same with this one so it fits back on, and it needed a little bit more adjustment too, so I'm going to open those up a little bit so I can slide that hinge up just a little bit more so I have a good tailgate to the top of the bedside fitment. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. Got my tailgate back on and got it fitted fairly good. I'm gonna go over how to fit these tailgates kind of in just a second. But I think I've got this tailgate about where I want it so I can start doing body work. I do kind of want to try and get the tailgate just a little bit higher in line with the bed there. It's only off by about 1/8 of an inch, but it's enough that I need to adjust that a little bit. And I'm gonna have to modify the hinge a little bit more on this side, and this is the old one, and open these holes up just a little bit more so there's a little bit more adjustment, as you can see right here. So the tailgate itself is pretty much straight. The actual bedside is just not super quality. So right here, there's a little bit more of a gap. I'm gonna have to weld and add a little bit of weld right there, bring that out just a little bit, and probably all the way down into like right here. So there's about a 5-inch gap that's gonna have to be added to it. And then it's not quite flush, but I think it's not enough where I think just a little bit of filler will be okay to bring this together. This side's a little bit different. There's a little bit more of a height difference right here on the tailgate versus the bed. This side actually has a little bit better line to it. Still has a bit more of a gap right here. I'm gonna have to take care of that as well. I mean, overall, the fitment isn't that bad. It probably isn't any worse than the factory sheet metal was. even though, you know, you'd think with today's methods that you would have a little bit better stampings, but I mean, it's not terrible. I have had some sheet metal on some cars that fit a lot better than this. This is gonna require a little bit more work. The height on this side's pretty good. I might bring that up a little bit as well. Now, I want to talk about, this is the other hinge I decided not to use. And I will say, after using the polyurethane type hinges, they're pretty good. My only complaint is it really cuts into the polyurethane quite a bit if you have any sharp edges. So I'm almost wondering about trying to make a shim or something that goes inside of the bed, because these are definitely not made very well. Even grinding some of the burrs out with a diamond bit, they're still not very good. So I'm almost wondering about opening the bed up a little bit and trying to find, machine, or make some sort of a shim to fit in to the tailgate in order so it fits perfectly on the polyurethane bushing. I just feel like that might be the best bet for durability over time with these stampings, and also just to get a super tight fit, because I think part of the problem with this gap is also the bed, or I should say the tailgate, is kind of wanting to sit down just a little bit, just because this does not fit tightly against that hinge. There's just a little bit of up and down movement. So that's just another thought about what I might have to do just to get this up to my standard. Now with these hinges, you wouldn't think that there's a lot of adjustment, but there actually is a lot of adjustment that you can do with these tailgates with just the hinges. Obviously you can open them up like I did a little bit here for a little bit more up and down, but I mean, just the amount of in and out and the amount that you can rotate this way or this way a little bit with just these slotted hinges can move this tailgate a lot and determine how well it fits and how well it sits on the truck. Even just a little bit of adjustment on the tailgate hinges will make one side of the bed sit out from the tailgate or sit tight. On this particular one, this always sat nice and tight. And this always had a decent gap on this side. And just by adjusting this hinge differently, and I actually pulled this hinge out a little bit, made this side fit tight and also made this side fit tight. So, and as you can see too, tailgate opens and closes without really any effort, without having the latches installed. So I mean, I've got it to where it opens and closes pretty good and to where it fits fairly decent. So just so you guys are aware, when it comes to these tailgates and those hinges, you might not think you can adjust it and get these to fit better, but you probably can, because there is a lot of movement in those hinges, back and forth, up and down, and even just tilting them or twisting them can get these to fit a lot better. So now the next step on this bed is going to be doing some of the really nitpicky work, kind of the stuff that really sucks, but you know, basically the final fitting and getting this stuff cleaned up as far as, you know, filling these gaps with welds, getting the gaps on the tailgate looking good, and then the body work, you know, taking care of the stake pockets and everything else that I've welded onto here. But also the big thing is my fuel filler that's gonna go behind the tail light here. I'm not gonna spend $700 and buy the kit that they sell for these. I'm just gonna make my own, because that, for what it is, a tail light and a box with a filler for $700 is just an absolute ridiculous price. So I'm gonna have to decide what I wanna do here first before I start building that and get parts in hand to you know, make stuff and assemble stuff. So first thing I do need is I'm gonna need an 1.5 inch filler with a vent that's built into it, so I can run the 1.5 inch hose and the 1/2 inch vent hose down to the tank. and then obviously a cap and everything that's gonna fit in here. And then I do have enough sheet metal, obviously I can get this boxed in, so don't need that, but need the filler, need a cap, and then I need to decide what I'm gonna do on lights back here, and if I'm gonna use chrome or bezel around here or not. And one thing I do like, but I don't think it'll work for my filler back here because I've never seen one done, and that's where they cut this piece out and they make this, they sell lights that where this is just all one single brake tail light and they get rid of the reverse lights. I really love that look and I like it a lot, plus the way that they sell the custom aluminum bezel that goes around it looks really nice compared to the factory trim. The only problem is I don't know if that will work, if I can make it work with a filler. So I don't know the actual thickness of it and if it would, you know, work. So I need to do some looking into that. And the other option obviously is just, you know, put my reverse lights in, have the separate brake tail light, and, you know, just plan as I was going to and having just this piece hinge out, which isn't a big deal. I can get those fairly easy. The only big thing is deciding if I want to do trim with that or not, or just have the lights. I would like to have chrome trim back here just because between the tips and that would be the only chrome on the back of the vehicle. So I kind of would like to. My only problem is the factory trim. I don't really like how it looks, especially where it mounts. It has kind of some holes and screw holes back here. I don't like that. I just would like to have a bezel and that's it, without any hardware showing. So I need to decide what to do there and get stuff ordered and then get my filler neck built and my mechanism built for this to hinge out so I can fill this thing with gas. Otherwise, obviously, you can't drive it. So other than probably starting on doing some body work on this thing, I'm probably going to set this aside. Well, it's actually already kind of set aside, but I'm going to stop work on this for just a little bit and get back to some of the other stuff on the truck. One of those other things is going to be the fenders. So I've got these in what's hopefully the final coat of primer. The other night, and these sat out in the sun and baked all day, and they've been in here for about 2 days now. So these should be ready to go ahead and sand and hopefully get painted. I did notice a couple of imperfections that somehow I missed right there on that one, and right there on this one. So I don't know if there's enough high build to take care of that, or I might have to use a little bit of feather fill and fix those up. But hopefully I don't notice any other areas on these when I get them sanded, and I can basically just get these into paint right now. And that takes me to another point, which for me on a project like this, sometimes it's easier to kind of bounce back and forth and just kind of set small goals instead of trying to do something large all at once. And for me, just getting, say, fenders done and painted, and then, say, go to the doors and get them done and painted, then trying to do it all at once and get everything painted at once, it sometimes gets to be a little bit overwhelming. So right now, I'm gonna try and get these in paint, just get them kind of temporarily set on the vehicle, and then maybe even come back to the bed or start working back on the doors and get those finished. Which, speaking of the doors, I kind of wanted to get that pointed out. I don't know if I've got enough room I can show you guys. There we go. So there is my problem with the doors, and that's why I haven't come back and finished the doors, is because I have to deal with this. And the other door is fine, but the driver's door has an imperfection in it that I just missed when I was doing the sheet metal work, and I've got to take care of, and that's what bothers me. I mean, yeah, it's only an 1/8 inch gap. I mean, you're running the whole length of the door, has a slight bow in towards the middle that's only 1/8 of an inch, but on a black vehicle, if you're looking down the side, you're probably gonna notice that. So that's one thing I've got to come back and fix on that door. And that's kind of why I haven't gone to the doors yet, is because I didn't want to deal with that mistake. And you know how I am on my mistakes. I like to show them on camera just because no one else likes to show their mistakes. And unfortunately, when you're doing a project like this, there is definitely going to be accidents, there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be stuff that you have to come back and fix that nobody wants to do. But, you know, it just shows that these things happen and you guys should be prepared for it if you guys are doing your own project, because there's bound to be setbacks. Now on these fenders, I'd like to point out inside, you guys can clearly see those spot welds. You know, I'm not building a $250,000 truck here, so a lot of the areas like that are really not seen unless the hood's up, I'm not going to be body working stuff like that. It's just going to have kind of an OEM original look when it comes to it. As long as the outside is pristine, stuff like that is not going to bother me. I mean, I'm not building a, like I said, $250,000 Kindig design show car. So there are going to be certain areas that I'm not going to be doing to absolute perfection. Just like when I did the firewall here, showing you guys the firewall on the painted cab. So here's the firewall, and as you can kind of see, you know, the main part where you're focusing on, I did body work it and I got it fairly smooth. But you come into areas that probably aren't going to be noticed very much, where the fenders sit, and then really down low, I'm sure, where the inner fender is going to be. You may or may not see areas like this, but I did not body work everything just because the amount of time into doing that is just not going to be worth it for this build for me. And so while most of the focal areas are done well, you know, I'm not going over every single little spot weld and filling them with body filler. So I'm going to get some black spray paint and just spray some guide coat on these. And I'm going to start getting these sanded out, and hopefully they turn out well enough I can get these painted within the next week or so. Got the front fenders in guide coat, and I've gone ahead and got my long bar here with 220, and I've gone along and just hit it roughly. What I like to do on my final sanding is I take the top off with as long a bar as I can, with 220, and basically just take the top rough edge off of all the buildup of primer. And then once I get to this point right here, I like to go ahead and go down to 400 grit. Obviously there's areas like this where, you know, the bar is not going to fit. So I'll either go with a lot smaller bar there, or I will just get my small block and start doing all the small areas. And then obviously curves, you know, you have to get in here and do this by hand a lot of times, especially these little areas like this. But for the most part, I think that I'm going to be okay. I don't think I need to really come back. There's going to be a question about right there. That's about the only spot I think I'm going to have to maybe put a little bit of feather fill in right there. And again, if I need to do anything on top of the primer here to fill any small gaps, this is what I use, this 3M finishing glaze. This stuff is really great for very thin buildup, almost like 3 or 4 layers of primer. There is also one little spot, obviously much smaller than a fingernail right there, that I might have to do that as well. You can either use that finishing glaze or you can use this 3M putty. That little spot is a little bit too big for this. This is actually more for like small pinholes. So that is not a pinhole, but obviously that little speck on there, if that was the size of the pinhole, that would be good for that. Say stuff like this, if these are actually just heavy primer spots, but if these were pinholes, this stuff would work good for that as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a bunch more sanding. From this point forward, might hit it with the block with the 220 just a little bit more, but I'm pretty much gonna come back with the rest of this now with nothing but 400 grit to finish this whole thing out. And again, guys, if you're doing metallics, I recommend going down to 600 wet sanding before your final paint. If you're doing solid colors, 400 is usually fine. I've always done 400 with solids. The difference really is bite. I mean, obviously with 400 grit, paint's gonna bite a lot better to a 400 grit sand than a 600, but if you do not sand this down to 600 grit with metallics, a lot of times you're gonna see scratching, or you're gonna see the metallics lay down funny. You're gonna see that in your final paint. So solids, 400's fine. If you just wanna be safe, either way, just take it down to 600. It's not that big of a step extra. Once you get done with your 400 grit, just grab some 600 and then wet sand it again really quickly with 600. So in the end, I mean, if you want that just perfect paint job, maybe take that extra step and go down to 600, depending on how much effort you guys want to put into it. If this was a hugely expensive build, you know, again, $250,000 truck, I would probably take that extra step. Where this is gonna be, you know, around an $80,000 truck, I'm just going to probably stop like I did with the cab and do a 400 as my final. If you are sanding, or especially me, I should say me, when I sand this, I am going to cut through probably to the epoxy and quite possibly easily to bare metal in a few spots. I almost guarantee it. You're gonna see it in quite a few different areas where I cut through. That's not gonna be a big deal with this particular paint job because, I mean, I'm just going by what the instructions say with the paint manufacturer, but with the particular black that I'm using on this from PPG, they state specifically, no matter what, before you spray your base black, you have to do an epoxy sealer before you do the base. So no matter what, I've got to do DP90, thin down, sprayed over the top of this before I even do my base coat. So that actually doubles in two ways. Number one, I don't have to be careful about not sanding through the bare metal. I can actually just get a little bit crazier and sand further down, knowing I've got to come back over with that. So it actually helps me out, the fact that they recommend that. So no matter how this ends up when I'm done, whether it's down to primer or if I go down to bare metal, it's gonna get covered up with DP90 epoxy sealer. So if you guys see that in the future, don't worry, it's taken care of. Okay, so I've got the right fender pretty much blocked out and ready for paint. There's a couple of little things I still have to do on this side. One of those things being a couple little pinholes we talked about on this fender that I had to fill, have to block that down a little bit. That will take care of that. And then the other thing is I always do the panel lines last when I'm blocking. So I always do the big portions first, and then I come back and I always do my lines last. My only area of concern on this fender is where it got a little bit wavy, where I filled the marker hole, and gray is kind of horrible to see anything, even in good lighting. The best thing you can do is wet it down, and that gives you kind of a good idea of what it will look like with paint. So far, I'm thinking it's pretty flat. The other thing I like to do is come in with a wet rag and then also wipe it down. Sometimes the thickness of the water hides stuff. If you use a wet rag with either some parts cleaner, or if you're just doing sanding, blocking, just your wet rag from water usually shows up a lot of stuff. However, it does not show everything, so you really kind of have to go over it and over it some more, because there's always some little things that you can miss. If you're outside in the light, it's a lot better. The problem is outside, it's a lot hotter than in the shop, so I prefer to be in the shop. Left fender here, as you can see, I have hit it lightly. Basically, I've just gone over this with 220 grit with a really, really long board, just to make sure all these areas are fairly flat. There's only one kind of low spot right there. I think my primer is thick enough that will sand out, but where the imperfections from the stamping were, mainly along the tops of both of these, they were wavy right here. And it looks like that is all going to be smoothed out and good to go. This side, not really worried about. This side turned out a lot better when I welded the marker up, and this sheet metal turned out a lot flatter. So I'm really not worried too much about this side, but I will give it a good eyeball once I've sanded that down as well. And in my other videos, I think I've gone over this, but if you're sanding a lot of these areas, that really aren't going to be shown, it's going to be covered by stuff. Obviously, this is covered by the grill, but you want to still break this down and roughen this up. You can do a couple things. You can use sandpaper, but what I like to do is for a lot of these spots that have crinkling from casting and stuff, or I should say crinkling from stamping, Scotch pad works really good to get into those nooks and crannies to be able to scuff it all down to accept paint, because while you're not going to see this, it's definitely just not an area you want the paint to lift in the future either. I think that's about it from this step moving forward. The other thing I'll mention is obviously the entire inside of both fenders will be hit lightly with a scuff pad as well, because they're going to get painted. Not as well as the outside, but they will get some color. So I will scuff up the insides as well once I'm done doing the outsides, and they'll be ready for paint on the inside. The inside, same as the outside, they'll get sprayed with epoxy primer, then base, then clear. But again, the inside is just more for the color than really for quality. Okay. Lots of sanding. Honestly, I probably got close to 4 hours in just sanding these two panels. I still haven't scuffed up the inside yet, but they are pretty much ready for paint. There's a few little spots I need to touch up a little bit. There's still a little bit of a low spot right here. Need to go over that one more time. These two spots came out good, and I found one more little pinhole right there, so I have to hit that with some 400 really quick. And then, as you can see, inside the wheel arch right there. Other than that, these are pretty much ready for paint. So obviously the next step is going to be getting up my temporary paint booth and getting these painted. And I think I'm going to do a couple little small pieces as well. I prepped the glove box door actually a couple years ago, and probably going to get it painted with this and maybe the ashtray as well too. So hopefully the next time you guys see these two panels, they will be in my paint booth and they will be getting paint on them. Another big step forward, and get these temporarily on the truck. I'm not going to get these bolted on the truck yet, just because the doors need to be finished and installed and aligned before these get finished and completely put on, but I can at least set them on the truck and get them out of the way so they don't get dinged and scratched around the shop. So hopefully the next time you see me and you see the C10 parts, they will hopefully be in my super custom high-dollar paint booth that I'm going to have to go down to the hardware store and buy some plastic and get put up again, so I can try and get some of these parts painted relatively dust-free. So if everything goes as planned, that's what you hopefully will see on the next video. More painting, which honestly, it's one of my favorite parts. It's quick, it's easy, but it just lets you see that all of your hard work actually paid off and things turned out pretty good. At least that's the plan. So, as always, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time. For those of you guys that stuck around till the end of the video, show you guys what I'm coming up with as far as interior colors. Now, it's pretty dusty, so try to ignore that. But I mean, obviously from the last videos that you guys hopefully have seen, you know, the whole interior has been painted black. The question now becomes, what do I do for the dash pad, door panels, and seat? And a couple of options I'm gonna do. One is either it's all gonna go black, factory type door panels, and I'm gonna go with black with white houndstooth inserts on the seat. The other two options are going to either be A, black leather. I know that kind of looks like gray in the light, but it really is black. This is a Euro smooth type leather. It's got a little bit of texturing in there, but the grain is pretty fine. And I really like that a lot. The other two options, which I can't decide, are one of these two. And again, on camera, this looks nothing like it. I'm looking through the camera and I'm looking at these two reds, and this is more of a deep red. It's similar to the camera, but not. And this looks actually red, almost like a light blood red. So unfortunately, it's not looking good on the camera, and they're a lot darker shade and more vibrant in person. But those are the two colors I am thinking about doing for the interior in leather. Don't know if I've got enough balls to do this. Probably end up doing black, but kind of would like the contrast of red interior with the black truck. There's also going to be a couple of red accents on the truck as well, so these should tie in nicely. This is actually the color I'm thinking about going with over this one, but again, unfortunately, it doesn't come off on camera as well as it does in person. So, tell me what you guys think, black or red interior? Give me your pros and cons of each. What do you guys think? I mean, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So anyway, there's the interior options for right now. See you guys later.